very interesting thing is how companies, at least the social distance, the lockdown, what are the implications of this for providing high-end services? For instance, high-end food kits or cooking ware or whatever. The cocooning, if you want, that is going on is likely also to change how consumers behave. And these companies will need to take a closer look. Data, the use of data, alternative uses of data. This is time that a lot of companies are spending time and they're outsourcing part of the analysis. Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Okay, no problem. And finally, of course, it has to do with the resilience of flexibility of forecasting, for instance, is a very important activity that some companies actually are building what they call nerve centers within their boundaries to understand and assess risk with respect to corona implications. Next slide, please. I will go through it. Now, I want to switch gears here and go a little bit into the regional dimension. What does it mean for regions? I don't mean regions in a general sense, but I mean collections of companies, agglomerations of companies operating within specific regional environments. Next slide. This is a fairly abstract understanding of how the economic activities of the planet are organized not on a geographical sense, but in operational terms. And think here of complexity. For instance, let's start with Airbus, the complexity of the production process in Airbus versus a drilling company that does drilling in Saudi Arabia or in any place that drills for oil. Obviously, the complexity between those two is enormous. The difference in the complexity of these two processes is enormous. How many companies and how many specializations are involved in making an Airbus plane, as opposed to drilling out a barrel of oil. So basically, the idea here is to understand the complexity. Complexity means, think, for instance, of places like Singapore, Los Angeles, San Francisco, as opposed to other areas which do not have the same intensity of production, and not just the co-location, if you want, of different production activities. Why is that important? Because during crisis, these areas with this kind of complexity concentration are better able to absorb and diversify activities as the crisis hit. The more, in other words, dependent an area is in certain types of economic activities and the businesses involved in them, the higher is likely to be the economic impact and the hardship expected. Let's move next slide. And this is how it looks if you want to put it around clusters, let's say, clusters of competencies, okay? For instance, think of financial services. Financial services have a lot of legal services which need to be very close to them, apart from, of course, advertising services, many other different services, which normally are co-located in places like London, like New York, like Tokyo, and so on. So all companies have different degrees of necessity or requirement of co-location. That is, they need to be closely aligned to each other. Next slide, please. If we look then at a map of Europe, we can map, actually there is a fascinating work that the Commission is doing on that, the European Commission is doing that, mapping every industry according to its degree of concentration. The historical question is why do companies concentrate in these areas? And that's a very big question. And whether the coronavirus is likely to change or Industry 4 is likely to change this. This is the map of biopharmaceuticals companies' concentrations around Europe. You can see the suspects. Every industry has the same, more or less the same outlook. Next slide, please. And look at how different the ICT in digital industries, for instance, looks. Okay? So we have different pockets of concentration, which obviously will address the current crisis in very different ways. Next slide, please. The fact is that historically, at least until the coronavirus, most of companies concentrate. In fact, the majority of innovation output of the world is concentrated in very few spaces around the planet. Okay, and to the right, you can see that. The question is, Is this changing? And what are the implications for companies in this? Next slide, please. Well, probably it is changing, because if you look at the OECD's thing, and again, I'm thinking here, what is ephemeral from what is going to last? These are the estimations of the relative performance of regions around the world, okay? The OECD's calculations around 2019. You can see US and Europe are likely to do, oh, everyone knows, we just didn't know the amount and the scale of this. Next slide, please. Why is this happening? Because of this. We have demographics, and demographics are very rarely mentioned. Well, they came up with the coronavirus because of most people who are actually dying are in care homes, and of course of an older age. Nonetheless, demography, as they say, is a destiny. Okay, you cannot change demography. Why is demography important? Because that's where markets go. That's where investments go. Is this likely to change with coronavirus? Personally, I don't think Volkswagen will be moving its facilities outside of Shanghai because of the coronavirus, although they will be taking measures. So there are long-term investments and positions which are not likely to be affected by coronavirus in the short or even long term. There are other reasons that these companies are there, apart from simply the cost of labor. So next slide, please. Now, if we look at this, and we bring it around Europe, Europe is trying to do something with it, with all its SMEs, and I'm sure you are familiar with some of it. Next slide, please. So what Europe is facing is a process of commoditization. That is, if the highest components of global value chains were concentrated around places like New York, London, Paris, or so and so, the lower parts of global value chains are subject to a heck of a lot of decentralization. That is, they are flown all over the place according to cost calculations and several other things. So what we have in Europe is the inability, or at least we're facing a big challenge, of commoditization. Commoditization effectively means going down the value chain from conceptualization to, of course, next slide, please. You will see the process of how this works. And obviously, going from the origination of an idea, of a service or a product, down to competing for it in terms of price. A good example, think of Apple and Acer or Lenovo computers. Apple doesn't reduce anything because you buy it for whatever you think it's worth. But it is I think, a very important point to keep in mind. In Europe, a lot of our regions are facing that. In France, for instance, where I spend a lot of my time, a lot of companies are facing that, but I can certainly see this in Lithuania. I can certainly see in a number of other cases. And why is this happening? Because companies are comparing costs across borders. And on top of that, we have the next slide, and you are familiar with this. This is basically China's expansion. I don't want to pick on China necessarily. My point here is to underline the proximity and what does it mean for businesses operating in Europe in terms of competing with some pretty aggressive companies that come from Southeast Asia in general, Asia and Southeast Asia. This is, as you might well, is this going to stop with coronavirus? I highly doubt it. Okay, if you ask me. Nonetheless, let's move to the next slide. What are the implications of this? Well, these are the implications of this. The loss of industrial capacity in Europe. Okay, this is the latest we have is from 2016. This is Commission statistics. Look, notice how Lithuania is doing fairly well, although there are problems behind it, and I hope to discuss them at the end of the next 10 minutes that I will be speaking. Let's move next slide. Yeah, I will not go through smart specialization. You all know, I imagined what it means. Effectively, it means focusing on certain capabilities that our companies are able to excel in. Next slide. And this is how effectively what the Commission has put into place in order to address some of the competitive disadvantages of Europe. How coronavirus will affect this is a big question that I do not believe anyone has even started thinking about it. Nonetheless, it's an extremely important component for individual companies, but also for economic agglomerations around Europe. Next slide, please. So let's move finally to spend a little bit of time on the final questions. What does it mean for most companies? You remember we used to say, well, governments don't matter, it should not matter in the economy. Where do most companies run today but the governments? Please save us, right? So the question is Industry 4 likely to be implemented without a heavy government intervention, or I wouldn't call it intervention, but rather presence, both in terms of infrastructural support, but also for targeted policies. You look at the discussion in the US, for instance. Some people are open and say, look, if we are to survive in this, we need a communist government, okay? We need universal income. If this lasts a few years, I mean, you know, New York will never be the same. Not a few years, people are already saying that. So what we're trying to do in this last part of this project, and I want to raise some questions with regard to what does it mean for Industry 4 and in the context, of course, of coronavirus. This is a methodology we're trying to address, to develop in order to understand the readiness of different countries and regions with respect to the transition, if you want, into Industry 4 capability. You can see on the left side the structure of production, the complexity that I was talking about, scale, and on the right side, drivers of production. Okay, so this is the future of production capabilities. This is how we try to break down. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Basically, our analysis is focusing on this. We are not by any means exclusive or the only ones that are doing this. This is a very important part of the survival of regions today, period. Next slide. And this gets a little bit more breakdown to understand and measure things in order for government to take appropriate action to assist companies, but also citizens in the sense of skills development. And so I will not obviously go through this. You can have the slides. I will leave the slides and I will be more than happy to discuss any. Next slide, please. Now, obviously here, and these are the big questions that I think that we're facing today, what are the framework requirements of Industry 4 and how coronavirus is likely to change the orientation we have so far. This is likely to slow down, or at least macro, on the policy side of things, to slow down certain parts that need to be addressed, for instance, regarding skills development. Well, if you have health issues and health systems need to be supported like yesterday, skills probably take are placed in a longer time horizon. Nonetheless, I have listed here some of the issues that are critical for Industry 4 and that are also unlikely to be addressed with equal attention. Next slide, please. Yes, now we come to employment. The International Labour Organization published, I think 2 weeks ago, a major report saying it's about 190 million jobs will be lost very, very shortly. And who knows how many others. So there is going to be 26.5 million Americans are on unemployment lists as of yesterday. In Europe, we have more broken down statistics, nonetheless, extremely important things, and we don't know whether and when these people are going back to work. So next slide, please. Well, what we were doing before coronavirus is basically try to understand how technologies make certain streams of labor obsolete. That is, what do technologies do better than humans? And of course, you can see the red parts of the technologies are not up to speed. This is from the US Department of Labor, if you want, but we have our own approach to this. And we were trying to understand what does Industry 4 mean in terms of upskilling of people? What are the new skills? What do companies, where should companies invest? Because governments invest. Next slide, please. And basically, we were trying to understand the vulnerability and the exposure to risk of different parts of the labor process. Okay, that is, you know what they say, artificial intelligence or robots will not take your job away, only about 80% of it. Okay, obviously we have a big problem in some of these areas. So these are the things we were trying to understand. Next slide, please. And obviously now, as you have all seen, an important part of the work we were doing, of course, was drawing on data science, predictive analytics, and so on. These are some of the skills that we are being told today that are most in demand. Okay, you have seen what is very, very interesting is how much of the discussion on coronavirus was focusing on data, right? How to flatten the curve, right? The question is, do you have to be also a doctor to flatten the curve? Because you can measure how many people get the disease, but you don't know who is going to die. Okay? So there are some gaps in my view in terms of Industry 4, especially the use of artificial intelligence in predicting things. Gaps which can be bridged, but nonetheless can be also very disastrous if they're not addressed properly. Obviously, ICT is one of the drivers of the industries that are using this, but there are many, many other financial services. Everyone else is using artificial intelligence. So the question with respect to skills is who has these skills and how far are we? In fact, is Europe, if you look at the statistics, Europe is doing fairly well in relation to other international competitors. The question is, these people are not properly integrated into the production process. And this is part of the issue we're trying to address. Next slide, please. Yes, the other issue is if these are driving the skills, this is the skills composition of companies, the other one is what happens to the rest? You know what they say, most labor economists, when they look around the world, they say, well, we are in a world that is Mac and Mac. We have Mac jobs, McDonald's jobs, and Mac jobs, Apple jobs. Okay, so we have a polarization of the world. We have a lot of Uberization. Basically, the labor processes become Uber. Okay, basically you are task-oriented. There is no career path. Okay. The question here is, what does that mean for the sustainability of any Industry 4, let alone for poverty attached to the current situation of coronavirus, of people engaged in this kind of activity, especially the Mac jobs, the MC jobs. I will leave it at that, this one. Let's move to the final component. Yes, people say coronavirus is driven also by poverty, but it's also driving poverty. What is amazing here is before in coronavirus, this was the division of the world in terms of, this is the global wealth pyramid. Is done by Zurich Reinsurance, in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Zurich Reinsurance, the biggest reinsurance.
Да, Тимур, да.
Go, Takis, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. And the question is this, what are the implications both for Industry 4 and the coronavirus for this? And the final thing I have to say, and I'm 1 minute ahead, next slide. Yes, and here we come to the final, next slide. The situation, I don't need to stress, I'm sure all of you are aware, is fairly dire, especially in Europe. Yes, there was an agreement yesterday regarding some layouts of, I think, 540-something billion regarding the immediate problems of workers in Europe. The bigger question is, does Europe need a Marshall Plan again? Well, obviously, you can see the discussion being between South and North. It doesn't really look very good at the moment. And the issue is, even if the money is put on the table, can the money be spent without institutional reform in Europe in a way that addresses both industry 4, especially the gaps I was talking earlier about, and the more immediate issues of health, of the health nature, and of course of the social security nature. Below that, I'm outlining a series of rather important and very complex issues regarding what is likely to happen in this emergency environment. We live in not a democracy, in my view, not an aristocracy, although we do live, but probably in an algorithmocracy. That is, whoever has the most sophisticated algorithms wins. Okay, and I'm thinking here of the Googles of the world and nothing. So these are extremely important dimensions regarding regulation and how SMEs can survive in all of this. Challenges traditional forms of regulation. I will not go into that. Extremely important and difficult issues. If algorithms are proprietary, and the algorithms can change behavior, the law as it is written in books is very difficult to apply in a code unless it is decoded, unless the algorithm is decoded. But if it's proprietary, it's a difficult issue. Final slide, I will not go through all of it. I want to thank you for your attention. Monopoly, monopsony. You can see already the discussions regarding, I'm not thinking only Amazon, but many, many other places. The same thing is likely to emerge around pharmaceutical companies and the competition with respect to the coronavirus and the IPRs attached to them and the patent laws that govern IPRs. And whether this is slowing down the process of finding a vaccine is a huge question. Finally, I want to raise the question on whether we are going towards a more aggressive world trade situation pushed by the Americans and, of course, the Chinese in their own ways, and whether what would that mean, and not so much for the coronavirus, but for Industry 4 and economic sustainability as we move forward. These are the things I had to say to you. I know not all of them are perhaps all relevant to your specific concerns, but I hope I raised your interest. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Takis. And now it's time for discussion. And using Zoom platform, we can do in two ways. You can raise your hand and ask questions in live, or you can print your question using chat. So please, the floor, dear colleagues, is yours. Now I try to manage the whole list because we have 61 participants. Okay, I've got the question from Monica via chat. So I will try to read it, and Takis, you will go to answer.
Okay.
What would be the tools for academia and industry, how to drive new interdisciplinary professions? As any data scientist or developer or IE specialist has to understand certain industry in expert level and innovations potential in this industry to be able to apply the specific skills. I really like the question, Takis, please.
I'm not sure what do we mean by tools. Are you thinking of electronic tools like software tools, or are we thinking of tools as a way of organizing the flow of knowledge and information?
Based on the context of the question, I think that we are talking about the ways how academia have to implement the interdisciplinarity to its activities.
That's an extremely good question, and I don't think it applies only to academia. I think it applies across industries and across companies, and all organizations are facing exactly the issue. I will start with an example. I spent a lot of time at INSEAD in south of Paris, which is a big business school. And once we had the design head of BMW as a speaker. And somebody asked exactly that question. Can you please tell us what kind of skills are sitting around the table when BMW is setting out to design a new car? And the first question was, you know, we have some philosophers, we have some aestheticians, okay, people who understand aesthetics, okay, and the last people that he was talking about was industrial engineers. And it was very, very interesting that the approach. And people asked him and said, look, design doesn't come out of, you know, industrial processes necessarily. It comes out of beauty. And as everyone knows, as Bugatti used to say, the only thing that sells cars is beauty. So the question nonetheless is extremely important. And I think a lot of schools are facing that. The problem is that there is a wide space in the lexicons, that is the languages across disciplines. For instance, what an ontology is to the social scientist has nothing to do with what a computer scientist understands as an ontology. Okay, and actually I speak from personal experience because it took us for a long time to understand what the heck we're talking about, because I was using ontology in a social scientific way, but the computer scientists across me were talking about something completely different. So what is the best way? The best way, of course, is, as we all know, today's problems cannot be addressed. Economic problems are no longer economic problems. And I wouldn't bring here the issue of ethics. For instance, is inequality a thing that's bad economically, or is it bad for innovation? Who should be answering that question? It's very interesting work. Inequality is not because we want a more socially just society, although we should, in my view, but no, inequality simply drives down the process of innovation. That's why Apple is designing lower grade components. It slows down because people have no money to buy every 3 years a new 12 and 1400 euro phone. And it's not only Apple that is facing this. So it's an issue of whether, who is going to answer this question? And I think the question is extremely important. I do not believe we can address I think the best way to address this is case by case. I do not think the same people should be involved throughout all problems of a university or a particular course. Okay, it depends on exactly what the case we are facing is, and then the way, increasingly, the way I think leading organizations are addressing this is they're addressing problems as a fire squad, that is the fire department. Each fire is different. Okay, some are chemical, some are whatever. So the type of expertise that gets on board and the type of equipment you take is completely different. So each case, I think, needs to be addressed in a cross-disciplinary manner. For instance, lawyers, I cannot think discussing a lot of Industry 4 without understanding IPRs. I mean, you know, like, yeah, we can talk what technologically is possible is not legally possible or economically possible. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. If that's what we mean by tools, I think this is the way, the only way that we can move forward. I hope I'm answering.
Okay, thank you, Takis. We have one more question. It came from Manuel Morales. So regarding resilience as one of the desirable variables to encourage in the post-COVID-19 worldwide era, and assuming that one of the main alternatives to improve resilience is throughout diversity, does an introduction of diversity in the structure of production and operation models will affect the production efficiency in the global value chains?
A very good question. I think if you look historically, companies have lost competitive advantage precisely because of their dependence, or sometimes one particular component that was done in some country, in some village, it doesn't matter. Diversification here would play a fundamental role, not only diversification of the profiles of that is having 2 or 3 candidates competing for your contracts that you have in order to supply you things, but across regions. I think this is becoming an important issue. I think some of the companies with lower commitments into areas like China, Indonesia, Vietnam, I think some of them who are less dependent, who have sunk less capital in that, will probably look a lot more carefully in that, and we will see some movement away from that. I do not think, as I was saying, I do not think very long-term investments and commitments in these markets are going to change because of coronavirus. And I find it very sad, in fact, kind of hypocritical, okay, of American companies blaming the Chinese when most of Americans are buying American products made in China. They are not buying Chinese products necessarily. Most of these products are made in China. So this obviously is going to be driven by political, also by political sort of decisions. Certainly France is pushing that. We will see, but I think diversification is the only way. Diversification and visibility, that is through the digitization of the process, is critical in order to be able to deploy artificial intelligence tools to assess relative degrees of exposure and danger. I hope I'm answering again, because online is a little bit difficult to sense the reaction of people.
Okay, thank you. More questions? Okay, now I see that there is no questions in the chat. I'll go through the raised hands. So please, we still have a couple of minutes. Okay, there's coming like, thank you for the presentation, but still no questions. So like, okay. Okay, so I think that it's the last chance, the last minute for you to ask questions, and then we'll move. So, okay, I think that, thank you, Takis, thank you for the questions, and thank you for your answers. And now it's time to give the floor for our president of BMDA, for Virginijus.
Thank you very much, Edita. And first of all, I would like to thank so much to Professor Panagiotis. So, dear Takis, thank you so much for, I really been impressed, you know, how in such short period of time, you've been able to show us such wide and in-depth picture on what is going on. And personally for me, what it was really reflected in my thoughts, what we are facing now for that new reality, what is coming. Two ways, actually. One way is what we see already some countries been doing, you know, they are trying to even more close down, to bring things into ourselves, try to do everything themselves. Another way is even try to more cooperate, even more try to be together, sharing different kinds of things, diversification, etc. And that reminds me actually what we've been doing here at BMDA, because this was the fourth webinar, and that has been done by our different members of association. So each school been coming up with their ideas and starting from the techniques, you know, how to better use the online tools, and also, you know, on leadership like yours, on economic development, etc. So that shows what we really can learn something and gain something from that situation, if we would be able to cooperate better. But in order to cooperate better, we need two more important things. We need trust and respect in each other. Respect in different kinds of things what we've been doing, and trust, it means what we need to be really transparent, really talk about our needs, and to be very open to that. So your presentation, so it was really clearly showed these things, and from our perspective, from the BMDA perspective, we would try to continue to do that. And if our members or friends of BMDA or those who would like to join us, if you have any new ideas for collaboration, for cooperation, for sharing something, so we are open for that. Please write to us, to Ugnia, to our BMDA coordinator, and we are ready to give the floor for that. And as one of the examples of the new initiatives, I would like to give now the floor to one of our members, to the president of EMS Business School from Russia, and they have some idea or suggestion, invitation to all others. So please, Andrei Kolyada, floor is yours. Please suggest.
Thank you very much, Virginius. And of course, I want to express my deepest gratitude for the beautiful webinar for Takis and for the entire BMDA team. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I will just take a couple of minutes of your time to very, very shortly and I hope smoothly express the idea. And in my opinion, why I was so interested in what Takis said actually in his presentation, because it looks like, and I fully support this idea that actually the world is not going to come back to the same state, situation as it was before the virus. And I think that the share of online and blended learning formats is going to increase in business education in general, and in particular in such programs as MBA, Executive MBA, and DBA programs. And I want to address for those of you who might be thinking that it is a good, nice idea to add the online and blended learning formats to your already existed on-campus MBAs, executive MBAs, and DBA programs in your portfolio. And when it comes to our end, I think that we can be a little bit helpful and useful for you because EMAS is among the leading schools in Russia and Eastern Europe, and we have 3 formats of MBA programs, meaning on campus in Moscow, meaning the online and blended learning formats, which means actually that we know the specificity of each format very, very well. And we teach in English, and thanks to our online and blended learning formats, we export our MBA and executive DBA programs to the global markets and to Western Europe and the US in particular. And we do it successfully. And the idea is that it may be very interesting for some of you who also want to use the opportunity and to go online and to not only to add the online and blended learning formats to your current portfolio, but also to refocus, for instance, from a local market to the global market, because we already have positive experience and we do it in a standalone way, meaning we export our programs in English to the global market and to Western Europe, but also we have 3 very successful partnerships. We do double degree program, which are constructed, designed on the basis of EMAS programs. We do double degree with a school from Switzerland, with 3 schools in India, with a school in Cameroon, Africa. And we together constructed MBA, executive MBA, and DBA programs and focus both the local markets and the global market as well. So if you think that actually it is a nice idea to go online and blend it with your MBA, executive MBA, and DBA programs, if you think that it is vital right now to save a lot of time, meaning not to spend very precious time trying to design standalone program, but do it in cooperation way, in partnership way, and use our program as the basis and add your part, of course, in order to create double degree programs. So I would be happy to discuss it in a personal way. We'll be happy to to share details, and feel free to contact me. You can find my email and my phone, WhatsApp number on the bottom of the screen. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Takis and BMDA team.
Thank you very much, Andrei. So please, as Andrei mentioned, you can write straight to him or write to us and we connect with Andrei. Any other ideas what you would have, also you're welcome to suggest, and we are looking forward to a different kind of cooperation and provide possibility to a platform for information to spread among yourself. And just to finalize, and before saying thank you for organizers, I would like to announce to all of you our online BMDA pre-conference. As you probably know, most especially who are members of BMDA, you definitely know what we moved our conference due to coronavirus, which was planned to be in Estonia, hosted by Taltech, School of Business and Governance. We moved that to October 14, 16. But on the date when we've been planning our conference, on the May 20, we decided to launch the online pre-conference, so-called. It would be from 1 p.m. until 4:10. So, and during that conference, pre-conference, what we are going to discuss, we would like to actually go in depth what Taki started today. We will try to look, what kind of things we need to do in this crisis and post-crisis period. And if we can move to the next slide, we would like, to look in two panels how business on different levels are going to respond to that situation and what is waiting for us in the new reality which is coming soon. So we are going to have a different perspective from different continents, from the business people on the levels of the global, on the business and on the management level, and also from the business schools perspectives. And we would have the speakers from all around the world, as you see here. We have Deepak Jain from the president of Safe China. We have Andrzej Popaduk, president of Dance Foundation of Management Development. Andrew Wilson, chief of AMBA. We have Sherif Kamel, the dean of the business school at the American University in Egypt. From businesses, we have the NASDAQ chairman of the board in Estonia, Karel Oz, and Mickey Granat, vice president of strategic planning from Israel. So they are going to talk and discuss what kind of implications we might have and what kind of future we might predict. And they would be looking forward also to your discussions, to your questions. I hope, but that meeting is going to be interesting and provide some additional insights. Also, at the end, we would tell a little bit more about the coming conference in October and present some of our new projects, which would be example of collaboration of different business schools, leadership kind of projects, etc. What we've already been launching under the umbrella of BMDA. So you're welcome to join that. Once again, thank you so much, Takis, for a fantastic webinar. Thank you very much, Edita. Thank you very much, Kestutis, who are behind the scenes, who've been provided, different kinds of help and platform